Which one?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to class 2. Woohoo! Hello, everyone.
everyone doing?
I'm doing good.
Hopefully everybody out there is doing well also. So I gotta tell you guys, we're in an
Okay, I think everyone should be able to hear me now. So like Aubrey said, new technology, right?
They didn't hear me say that.
Oh, okay. Okay, so I'll start completely over. I said I like the banner that we can see at the bottom now because it reminds Annie and I that it's class 2 and not class 3, and we won't say the wrong thing.
That's right, or we're not supposed to be demonstrating something else to a different group of people.
Yeah. So thank you for joining us for class 2. Go ahead and tell us hi if you're on Facebook or on YouTube. Say hi in the comments so we know you're here and you're watching. And oh goodness, what else was I going to say? I said there was one piece of housekeeping. We put a post up yesterday too, so some of you probably saw it. But in our Facebook group, we just put a post up saying if you have any customer service questions, go ahead and email those to us or call our phone number. I don't know it off the top of my head, but I know it's on our website and pretty easy to find. Call that phone number because we have a lot of you awesome ladies here in our Facebook group, and we don't want to miss your comments or your post asking specific questions about designs or orders or anything like that.
Right. I got the phone number in my head if you want
Go
me to
ahead.
tell. Right? It's 866-497-4068.
Yes.
866-497-4068. Or this is easy, info@hoopsisters.com.
There you go. And we'll get back with you. That makes it, we can provide you a little better service that
sometimes
way.
we lose.
Yeah, or we see it at 8 o'clock at night and then
and the next day
shoot.
we completely forget to answer it and help people. But so Sarah, you ready for class 2?
Yeah, give us 1 second.
Any
Turn
more?
that mic.
Okay, you guys should definitely be able to hear me now. Let's see.
We're going to have feedback if we use that microphone.
Okay, you guys should be able to hear us now. Give us 1 second. We are trying to troubleshoot through a couple technology things. My sound might go out for a second, and then if you can just let me know in the comments if you can hear me in a moment. So give us 1 second. Okay, now you guys should be able to hear me. We were trying to get a second camera up and running and it didn't want to behave. So I apologize for that. That's frustrating. I know. I know. Someone said you can't read lips.
I can't either.
Okay, so let's go ahead and get started here. So what we are doing today is this is class 2 for our Quilt-In-The-Hoop 101 course. And last week, Annie and I were here and we covered a bunch of stuff.
Mhm.
We covered a ton of material and we stitched out a block together. This is the block that we stitched out. This is called our basic block. And a few of you were saying, do I need to stitch this? If so, how many do I stitch? And I really, really, truly should have called this a test block because this is really more like a test block for you. So this, I would recommend that you stitch if you are someone who's never done Hoop Sisters before, if you've never worked with battleizer or wool or water-soluble thread. It really is to test out those items and see kind of how they stitch on your machine and get to know your machine with those items a little bit more. I love in a 4-patch like this with that contrasting quilting thread and the wool behind it because it's just so pretty.
It looks really cute. So this is just one block and Sarah's holding up 4 of them that have been stitched together.
And that is the block that we stitched last week. And last week we stitched it on Frankenbat. So if you guys remember, we talked about battleizer. Do you want to give them a quick rundown of what battleizer is?
Sure will. Battleizer is a combination of a batting and stabilizer product. And it's basically because we're doing embroidery, so we need to have all those stitches stabilized, but it's also quilting, so we need to have the batting in there. And so that's what battleizer is. And when she talks about Frankenbat, you can see the red zigzag right down the middle. Is sometimes when you put your battleizer in the hoop, when you go to trim it, you'll have a section of it that's extra. And rather than throw it away, you take a couple of those and just overlap them slightly. Take your rotary cutter so you have an even edge on both sides and zigzag them together, and then put that in the hoop and reuse it. It's just a way to kind of save your money a little bit and save your batting.
I have to give a shout out really quick because for a moment there we had someone named Lurker join us on the back end, and it freaked me out for a second, but it was just Linda.
Lurker?
She named herself Lurker.
Oh, that's just evil.
So for a second I was like, oh no.
How do you know it was her?
It looked like her.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, so we covered battleizer and then we talked about wool, which wool is what you can add into your block that we're going to add today. You can add that into your block to get a little more dimension. So, and this block, hopefully you guys can see it. It's got a little more dimension in that quilting because I added the wool into there. If you're using this, like if you're making this as a table topper, I wouldn't add wool into it just because when you set things on it, you want it to lay a little bit flatter and not have that dimension.
Right.
But it's great for wall hangings, bedspreads, things like that.
The dimension makes your drinks or your vase is a little wobbly. So you might want to skip the wool on that. But here's a piece of wool that we have. We tell you what size to cut it. And then we tell you to press the edges. So the edges, we tell you to prepare the wool. That's just pressing the edges to flatten them about 1/4 of an inch on all sides of the block. So that's the wool. And then we talked about water-soluble thread as well.
Yes.
Yep. And we use water-soluble thread. We are not going to use it for the demo today. And the reason is because we want you to see what's stitching. Generally, you're going to use your water-soluble thread in the first 2, 3, 4, depends on the design, sometimes more stitches. And that's basically, you're going to have fewer thread changes. So you don't
That's
have to,
my favorite reason.
That's
to be
my
honest.
favorite reason in the beginning. And then once you get your block all sewn together, there's usually a basting stitch towards the end or before you put your backing on it, if you're putting a backing on it. And that's to give you an edge to trim your block against. And we use water soluble for that step as well, simply because when you get your blocks sewn together, sometimes when you open them up and you look at the front of your quilt, you can see where that basting stitch was. And
so this is an example of what she's talking about. You can kind of see, I used a polyester thread that was just a little darker so that we could really see it. But you can see that right in that seam, and that would be such a pain to rip out.
Yeah, and you don't want it to stay there. You don't want to
Right.
see that.
Right. And then this is an example of when we are using water-soluble thread for the
Put 'em
basting
up
stitches.
together. See?
So that's kind of your difference there. This
Yeah.
one looks a lot cleaner
Yeah.
to
So
me.
rather than a seam ripper, you just need a little Q-tip and some water, or throw it in the washing machine and rinse it with cold water.
Yeah.
And move on. So Sarah, what have you got for today's class?
Okay, so today we're kind of building on the skills that we learned last week and the items that we learned about last week. So we're building on using the battleizer and the wool, if that's what you want to use, and the water-soluble thread. But then we're changing our block a little bit and adding some piecing into it. So we're doing stitch and flip. That's what we like to call it.
Yep.
So do you want to tell them a little about the stitch and flip method? Because I think it's adapted from a more traditional quilting method.
It is. Basically, your stitch and flip is you're going to tack down your first piece of fabric, and then the next step is you're going to do that with water-soluble thread, and then you're going to change to just regular thread, and you're going to lay the next piece of fabric right side down with the raw edges even, and the embroidery machine stitches your seam. And I will tell you too that sometimes people are a little nervous. Well, how do we know where to put it? And did we trim our fabric that's already in the hoop correctly? And with our method, you don't have to worry about it because the machine knows exactly where to sew the seams. And so that's one of the nice things. You don't have to worry about, like traditional quilting, you have to have a perfectly cut size piece of fabric.
Yeah.
You have to have a perfect quarter inch seam. But with this method, you don't really have to worry about those two things.
You have
being
quite a bit of
perfect.
wiggle room, I would
You
say.
do. You really do. And I like wiggle room because things aren't always perfect.
Yeah. And one of the questions that somebody asked a couple days ago on Facebook was I think they were getting their fabric ready for today, and she was cutting the 8-inch block, which is what this is behind me. We have 5 and 8 inch, but she was cutting the 8-inch block. And she said, why is the backing fabric 8 3/4? And then the fabric for the front is 9 1/2.
Yeah.
And that's just because, and this is also the fabric that I'm using today. And I've got this corner lined up. So here's my backing fabric for the 5-inch. And you can kind of see how this, once I've cut it in half on the diagonal, it's larger. And that's because when we are doing a stitch and flip method, especially for like a half square triangle, that has to be larger so that you have enough fabric left over on the outside edges of your block. Otherwise, you're not going to have any fabric for your seam allowance.
Right. Yep. Because you're going to, when you flip it, you're going to lose your quarter inch and then some.
Yeah.
Yep.
So Aubrey is trying to work her magic on setting us up to do a demo because we love doing demos, but our other camera was not cooperating.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I think I'm going to take you guys over to our fabric and thread key. I'm going to give this a try and make sure it works.
That should work.
Yeah, this part should work. Let's see. Add to. Okay, awesome. You guys should be able to see this. I'm going to hop on Facebook and make sure. But so what we're looking at here is we are going to look at our fabric and thread key. And yes, you guys can see it over there. Yay. Okay. Let's see. So this fabric and thread key is just kind of walking you through what exactly you will need to be able to complete the design that's behind me. And then we also have a second layout, and you need things like battleizer, our trimmer by George, which we are talking about in, I believe, 2 weeks. So in class 4, and then your hoop scissors and different threads. Let me see. Okay, here is layout option 1. So this is our larger layout. There are only 2 blocks in this layout. And so the 2 blocks that you'll see here are the stitch and flip block and then the applique block. So not a basic block, just the one that we're working on this week and then the one that we'll work on next week. And if you are choosing to do this layout, you would need to stitch, oh goodness, I have to count for a second, 14. So you'd need to stitch 14 of the stitch and flip blocks. And then this page is going to tell you for layout 1, if you are doing the 5-inch blocks, exactly what yardage you'll need and what to cut those to. I mainly wanted to show you these layouts in here. This is for the 8-inch block. Okay, this is layout 2. So this is what's behind me. If you want to do that layout, that's what that would look like. So you would need 12 of the stitch and flip blocks that you would need to complete for that layout. And then I think we also have a couple different colorways. Let me get over to that. I'm laughing because Aubrey's doing a bunch of stuff right in front of me, but that's okay. She's getting everything set up for us. So this is a beautiful colorway. I always like to see these different kind of inspirations. Another colorway, and I think we might have one more. Yes, perfect. I love that I can share this with you guys and kind of walk you through some of these documents a little more. So again, I wanted to share that fabric and thread key because it's got those different layouts in there primarily. So layout 2, which is the layout that I made, and then layout 1 right here. So let me go back to this view. Okay, so our next step is we are going to do our very, very, very best to do a demo for you guys. Please bear with us for a moment because like I said, we're working with new technology and in a whole new space. So you guys are kind of our guinea pigs on this.
This is the best we can do.
Yeah, we're doing great. That's great. It'll work.
Hey,
There you go.
For winging it, we'll make it work.
Okay. So,
Now, let us know that you can still hear us.
yes. So I'll talk as loudly as I can. So over here at the hoop, I have a thread attached to the machine. I have our battleizer. Can you move this over there?
Yeah,
a
I
little
can,
bit?
sure.
I have our battleizer, which is that batting and stabilizer combination in my hoop. And then you'd use a water-soluble thread to sew that placement stitch. And like Annie said a little bit earlier, we're not going to use water-soluble today. We're going to use a thread that shows up a lot better on the camera. So I'm going to put my hoop back on my machine. And then I've got my prepared wool batting that we press the edges. We cut to size and press the edges. And I'm going to lay that in my placement stitch. And again, I apologize, guys.
You're good.
Okay, my view's good. I'm going to lay that in the placement stitch. So it's in my placement stitch now. Those pressed edges are perfect because I don't want my foot to get caught in my wool batting. And I will tell you, on this particular machine, the presser foot does not go up and down. It's at one stationary height. On most machines, I do believe that you can increase the height of the presser foot a little just so it skims the top of your wool batting. But now I'm going to put that in the placement stitch. And I'm going to sew the zigzag tack down with, you'll want to use water-soluble thread. I'm going to use that dark colored thread. Okay, so there you can see those zigzag stitches to tack down my wool batting. And as I tack this down, I just kind of use my fingertips to guide the wool batting and make sure that it's staying in the proper location and so that it doesn't get caught in the foot at all. Now our next step, we're still going to stick with water-soluble thread. We're going to pretend like I still have water-soluble thread in my needle. And we are going to sew the placement stitch over top of the wool batting. And the wool batting is always, I think I can pretty certainly say always an optional step. If you are not using it, you just skip that second step and just move right on to the third step, which is the placement stitch. Do you have my fabrics? stole my fabric.
Oh, you brought them over here. I didn't do it.
Okay, so now I have my placement, wrong way, placement stitch sewn. And now our next step is to tack down our first piece of fabric. So I'm gonna take that and, let me grab it. And I'm gonna align that in the placement stitch. I wanna lift up on all these edges to make sure that I have plenty in what will be my seam allowance. And then that I also have some overhang on that placement stitch. So I've got about 1/4 inch, maybe a little bit more overhanging down the center of my block. And now still with water soluble thread, I'll sew that tack down. Okay, so I have my hoop upside down for you guys. Okay, so now I've got my first piece of fabric tacked down with my imaginary water soluble thread. And again, you'd want to use water soluble thread here because these are your basting stitches that are going to show up right in that seam allowance that you don't want to pick out. Excuse me. So our next step is to place our second piece of fabric. And you know what? I'm not going to trim this. If you have like a 1/2 inch of fabric hanging over into this area, you'd want to trim it to about 1/4 inch, scant 1/4 inch from that tack down stitching on the inside edge of the block. Mine looks like it's right at 1/4 inch, so I don't need to trim it. That's kind of what Annie was talking about when she was talking about this method to create a quilt is kind of forgiving because you don't have to have a perfect 1/4 inch cut right there.
But I will also say that if your first piece of fabric is a dark piece of fabric and your next one is light, you're going to want to make sure that it is trimmed 1/4 inch, a scant 1/4 inch, approximately one of those, so that when you put the light fabric, that the dark is not showing through the light.
That's a great tip. And I would also add to that, if this is okay, that if this is my lighter piece of fabric, I would also make sure that it is completely covering.
Yes,
when I'm laying it
absolutely.
down, I would make sure I can't see any of that other fabric hanging out right here.
So if you need to go slightly more than 1/4 inch to cover that, go ahead and do that because we told you to cut the fabric up, plenty big enough to be able to do that.
And in our instructions, typically how we'll write this is I would write, take this piece of fabric, lay it down over the first one, approximately align the raw edges. And I'm meaning in this part right in the center of the block. So that's what I'm going to do now. And then using a neutral thread, we'll sew the tack down. And Annie, do you want to talk to them about what we mean when we say neutral thread?
When we say neutral thread, we're really talking about just a regular sewing thread, but I will tell you that many, many times I may not have the right color, so I'll just use my polyester embroidery thread.
Something that kind of matches the fabric.
Right.
Yeah, so that's what we're going to do now, and I'm going to sew that tack down.
Love half square triangles. There are so many things that you can do in different layouts and stuff.
Yes. Okay. So I've got my seam, and now I'll just take my fabric and I'll flip it right side up, and then I'm going to finger press and smooth out my fabric. So I'm going to lay it flat to do this because if I do it holding it up in the air, it's probably going to shift my design a little bit, and we don't want that. So I'll just finger press and smooth out, and then I'm going to put it back on my machine, and with a water soluble thread, I'll tack that second piece of fabric down.
So far you've only used your neutral thread for that seam. The rest of it's all water soluble.
Yes.
And this is the important spot to use water soluble because this could be the place where you're going to have where your seams come together in the front.
Yes.
And if you use the water soluble and your seam doesn't catch that basting stitch, then you're going to have to get your seam ripper out.
Yeah. And no one likes doing that. And I also wanted to show you on this step, if you are adding the backing fabric while your block is still in the hoop, you're also going to add your backing fabric.
Mhm.
And again, just lift up on all those corners, make sure it covers nicely. And then it clings pretty nicely to the battleizer. We'll just turn it over and smooth out my fabric on the top again, and then we'll sew the tack down with water soluble
Can I just
thread.
show them what
Yeah,
I do?
Go
Is
for it.
I will like
She peeks.
I peek underneath.
I
it.
just
Yeah.
pray.
Yeah.
Peek or pray in the comments.
Peek them and pray. Just to make sure it didn't move.
It bites me in the butt sometimes though, when I do that. Okay, so now we're gonna sew our tack down.
Okay. Wilma had a question about, do we recommend poly or rayon thread? We recommend polyester embroidery thread, and the reason for that is just because it's a little stronger than rayon. So we do recommend polyester embroidery thread.
Good question, Wilma.
It is a good question.
Okay, now I've got everything tacked down. I've got all my fabric placed.
It's looking good.
Looking good. Okay, so because I added that backing fabric in the hoop, from here on out, it's very important that you match the thread in your bobbin to the thread in the needle. So I did change out my bobbin to match my needle. And now for this next step, it's gonna sew the quilting, but what you want to do is turn off your automatic thread cutter and also bring that bobbin thread to the top of your block.
So why do we turn off our automatic thread cutter and bring our bobbin thread to the top? There's got to be a reason.
You tell them that while I fumble with trying to get it to the top.
Multitasking is hard under pressure. But basically we do that so that the back of your quilt, since you already have your backing on, is going to look just as pretty as the front. Sometimes a little bird nest will happen if you have your, if you don't bring that bobbin thread to the top. So it's very important that you do these two steps that she's talking about.
And it does make a really big difference.
It does make a big
I've definitely
difference.
forgotten to do it, and I can tell when I look at that block.
And then you just want to kick yourself because you have to do it all over
Yes.
again.
So now that I did those things, which were turn off my automatic thread cutter and bring my bobbin thread to the top of my block, I'll sew my quilting.
Time it out. It's okay now.
Okay, so I've got the half the quilting done, and I decided to use a thread that contrasts. I keep putting this upside down for you guys. A thread that contrasts my fabric a little bit, just so that we can see it on the camera, because I think it looks really pretty. And if you see on your screen, Denise asked a question over on Facebook. She said, do you need to keep swapping the bobbin out every time you use water-soluble thread? And you don't. What we use, Denise, is we just use a pre-wound bobbin. And you don't have to put water-soluble or any in the bobbin or anything like that.
That's a good question.
Yes, that is. Do you have more to add to that, or
No,
did I cover it?
No, just we like to get the pre-wound embroidery bobbins. Just use embroidery bobbin thread in the bobbin, so you don't have to switch that out all the time.
Yes.
It's only after your backing is added that you're gonna match your bobbin thread.
Right. Okay, so I'm gonna rethread my machine with a different thread
Okay.
in both the needle and the bobbin, and then we are going to sew the last step of this block.
And we had a question about bringing the bobbin thread to the top again. If you want to talk about that, Sarah,
Yeah.
when you're ready to
Let
go.
me get this in there. Okay, so I changed my thread in the needle and my thread in the bobbin, and my two threads match now. So we've got matching threads in both places. Let me trim some threads.
And Carlene had a question about the weight and the different colors.
Let me answer this one really quick.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry.
Getting ahead of you. This
I'll
assistant
forget.
professor.
I'll
will just
forget.
pump that one up.
Okay,
while
all
she
right.
adds it up.
Okay, so someone asked about bringing the bobbin to the top of the block. So what we do is just needle down, needle up. You can get it to the top of the block. And the reason that we do that is because we don't want to create any bird nests on the back. So what a bird nest is basically a clump of thread that would be on the back of your block. And it's not as desirable of a look, right? It looks a little bit more messy.
Mm-hmm.
So I've, of course, used this print fabric, which makes it more difficult to see. But when you bring the bobbin to the top of the block, it really avoids any of that nesting of thread, and it makes it look a lot cleaner on the back. So let me know if that didn't answer your question, and we can talk about it a little more.
Okay. And Carlene has a question up there now. It says,
Can I get
okay,
this
sorry,
started
I'm
really
just, yeah.
quick? Sorry, give me 1 second. I'm
Poor
gonna get
Carlene.
this. I just want to get this very last step started, and then we can kind of change the camera angle a little bit. Trim this. Okay, so here is our block. And yes, I use two different thread colors on the different fabrics. I'm going to go ahead and take this out of the hoop. We'll switch around our camera so that you guys can see Annie, and then we can chat a little bit more.
And Carlene, can I answer Carlene's
Oh, yes,
question
Carlene,
now?
I'm so sorry. Please
Sorry,
answer her
Carlene. Carlene was asked, she says what her machine recommends bobbin weight and stuff like that. And she's asking about white and black. That's basically all the different bobbin thread colors that she's seen.
The pre-wound.
The pre-wound or even just spools of it. And you know what? Probably 90%, maybe 99% of the time, I just use a white bobbin. Sarah used a white bobbin today. Now, if I'm using black thread, sometimes I'll use a black bobbin, but you don't have to worry about finding embroidery bobbin thread that's going to match the thread you're using.
And
Don't
if
worry
you
about
do
that.
add it, and we just wind it right from our polyester spool of thread.
Right, I think she was talking about the beginning parts,
Okay.
you know, when you're doing your placement stitch,
Got
your
it.
first few steps and that. Now, like Sarah said though, in case this is really the question, I didn't understand Carlene's question, but if once you get the backing added and she has matched her bobbin thread, you're going to just wind a bobbin from your polyester embroidery thread. So maybe I misunderstood her question. In the
I
first
don't
place.
know.
So, but that's the answers. Hopefully that is clear.
But here is our final block. And so I hope that helped kind of explain what we mean when we say neutral thread, why we use it there, why we use water soluble thread in those basting stitches still.
Yep.
And everything else we covered.
Yeah.
So what kind of do we have any more questions today?
Let me check
I
and
bet
see if
we
we
do.
have any on here. Yes, Chris, needle down, then needle up. Bring that bobbin thread to the top once your backing is on there.
Yep.
So I'm trying to see if there's any more questions. Are there any up there?
I don't see many coming in up there.
That was answered. You're welcome, Carlene. It took a
Awesome.
while. It took a while for me to understand exactly what she needed to know.
Someone did
too.
ask if session 1 was available. Still,
Yes.
and it is. And if you're registered for the class, it's in your email twice, and we're sending it again with this one later today.
Yes. Okay.
And if you aren't registered for the class and you just kind of are joining us to learn a little bit more, you can still find class 1 in our Facebook VIP group, as well as over on our YouTube channel. So you make 12 of these blocks. If you are doing this layout right behind me, yes, you would want to make 12 of them.
So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
She checked my math.
Is this, well, I knew there was 3 and there's 4 corners. So is this next week?
This one is next week.
Woo!
We're going to do the applique next week, which I bet will be easy for these gals, especially if they're embroiderers. So that should be pretty easy. They've probably done some appliques before. So we'll cover appliques, and I think everyone's favorite is going to, next week at least, is going to be that we are going to cover your different options for backing. So whether you back it in the hoop, like I've done for both of our classes, or you wait until later and you back, this size wall hanging, you can back in one piece, or one of our larger quilts, you can back in sections. We will be covering all of that.
Somebody wanted to see the back.
The back is kind of wild with my fabric here. I think I have.
And then I have another question. Could you
Maybe.
use
I don't
water
have it here.
soluble for the seam too, since it gets quilted? I would not recommend that, Michelle, simply because sometimes the quilting may not cover that seam completely. So you do need to change your thread out and use a regular sewing thread.
Yeah, because if you wash it, it would definitely get
You
loose.
can have
And
some little holes in
I
it.
even think on this design, it very well may come all the way loose.
Mhm.
But this is kind of an example. If you aren't interested in making something this large and you just want to do something a little different with that block, I think this would be adorable as a table topper as well.
You're proving my statement I made earlier
that?
about half square triangles. The layouts are
They're awesome.
Yeah, I
and
mean,
you can do
unlimited.
You can make this look so different with just kind of how you rotate those blocks too.
Yes,
So-
absolutely. So it'd be fun, hopefully, when they start making this, what layout they choose and how they turn their blocks and stuff. It'll be fun to see. You guys are going to have to post your pictures
Because
because
we've got
that's the highlight of our days
Yes.
is when we can see what you guys do.
We've got some creative ladies in here and gentlemen. Something just came in. Let's see.
The picture quality is not as clear as last week. It's a bit soft. Okay, well, Pat, part of the reason is because we're trying out some new technology. It didn't work exactly like our plan A, so we went to plan B. So we're hoping by next week we get all the kinks worked out, so that'll be a little bit more clear. So anyhow, there you go. And she also says, wish she had this course beforehand. Good tips. So I'm glad you're enjoying it.
Oh, good. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
We're going to sign out for
I
now.
think we are ready to go unless someone enters a last minute question.
Better hurry.
I think we're good. Okay, so we will see you here next week on Wednesday at 2 p.m. and we will stitch out the applique block together and cover those backing options.
Awesome.
So we will see you next time.
All right. Thanks for joining us.